Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Big Jiu-Jitsu Show, a member of the Podbros Podcast Network. Don't forget to go to podbros.com and find yourself another podcast you want to listen to. And don't forget to check out our sponsors, Trap and Roll Soap Company, Tape Armor, Angry Joe Coffee, and PR Performance, and find all of our episodes, as well as maybe a shirt or a patch you might want to buy on bjjshow.com. I'm Rob, and today we have a legend on the show today. And this is something like I can think back to when I first started watching MMA. I was like, that guy is amazing, and I learned more about his story. So we have the fight professor, Stephen Quadros, on the show today. So, sir, thank you so much for being on the show.
Rob, thank you so much for having me. It's good to hear your voice and ready to jump into whatever you want to talk about.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I want to kind of like get nostalgia on myself a bit. And, when I first started doing martial arts, I was doing Taekwondo, and a buddy of mine, we started Muay Thai together, and he said, hey, why don't you check out some of these videos? And it turned out to be the old Pride Fighting Championship videos. And there were two guys on there who knew exactly what they were talking about and kind of really gave me an insight into MMA as far as like on the big stage. And you, of course, were one of them. And I really enjoyed watching your breakdowns before the fights, especially, the U.S. version of the production of Pride. So I know that you have a lot of experience in many different things. How did you come about doing martial arts and then later getting involved in being commentator and then just being the fight professor?
Okay, I'm going to give you the condensed version of this, which is still going to probably be so long, many people will fall asleep while I'm talking. But I started training in martial arts in 1973. Under the tutelage of a 5th-degree black belt in judo and hapkido and a 6th-degree black belt in taekwondo, a man from Seoul, Korea named Sunho Song, who still to this day remains a very profound friend and has had a huge influence on me for decades now. So it was a mixed style, when he put together judo, hapkido, and taekwondo. And it was before I actually saw any Bruce Lee movies. I'd seen Billy Jack, which was, a movie that Bong Soo-han did the doubles for Tom Laughlin. And it was kind of like had some action sequences that had kicks and flying through the air and stuff like that. So I did that because I was actually worried because I'd actually lost a couple fights in my youth, as a teen. And I wanted to know this fantastic power that they called karate back then. This is way before mixed martial arts or I knew about any of the, wrestling styles or anything like that. When I moved down to Los Angeles, I had the opportunity to train in Shotokan under Shihan Tak Kubota and then later on Sifu Conrad Volquez. Now, Tak Kubota was Shotokan karate, which was completely different than Taekwondo, Hapkido, and Judo. It was more sweeps and a lot of punches. Wing Chun, on the other hand, which I trained with Sifu Conrad Volquez, who, rest in peace, he passed away about 25 years ago in a car accident. That was a completely different situation. There was a lot of trapping and inside fighting. But I really wanted to kickbox because I was always reading about Don the Dragon Wilson, Pete Sugarfoot Cunningham, and Benny the Jet Urquidez in all the magazines at the time. So I finally got up enough money, saved up for doing acting jobs, and I went down to a place called the Jet Center, which was located in Van Nuys at the time. And a friend of mine, another actor, we went in there, and the place was completely empty. It looked like it was getting ready to close. And who would be in there but the man himself, Benny the Jet Urquidez, who was close to undefeated world kickboxing champion, who had a great spinning back kick and a left hook and everything. And I met him, and it was soon after that I started to train there. Benny was off doing a lot of movie work with Patrick Swayze at the time. He did Roadhouse, the original version of that. So I trained mostly with Pete Sugarfoot Cunningham, who became another profound influence on my life, a la Master Sunho Song in Santa Cruz, California. And so that's kind of how I started with my martial art journey. I don't really talk that much about my martial art training because there are other aspects of my life, music and broadcasting and some of the other things I get into. But I've got, pretty much a long-standing history of training in mainly the striking arts before I started to train in jiu-jitsu under Alberto Crane and also Romulo Bahal and Orlando Sanchez. But that's kind of it in a nutshell.
That is a hell of a martial arts journey right there. And there's definitely not, like, those are some hard hitters of people that you've learned from. So that is absolutely amazing. I could see definitely where the, I guess maybe the foundation of becoming the fight professor came from, under training under such big names like that.
Well, the funny thing is, you mentioned my nickname, which is the fight professor. That name was given to me by a 4-time world champion in kickboxing who actually fought Benny the Jet Urquidez 2 times in kickboxing matches. A man who's still a very good friend of mine who lives in St. Louis, Missouri, Ernest Hart Jr., who also, worked on a lot of movies like Live and Die in L.A. And, he's really a mover and a shaker. And he was a trainer for the St. Louis Rams the year they won the Super Bowl also. So, I mean, I got lucky. I mean, that was my first broadcasting job in Japan. And so Ernest, me, and play-by-play announcer Garrett Cruz from Arizona were in Japan one rainy night in 1998, my first commentating job ever. And we're there. It was a K1 show. It was a huge show. I mean, Ernesto Hus versus Peter Arts, number 3 in the main event. Maurice Smith fought Sataki. Andy Hoog, R.I.P., fought Curtis Schuster. And the opening fight was Maurice Smith versus, actually it wasn't Maurice Smith. It was Ray Cepho versus Francisco Filio. And so during the broadcast, Ernest turned to me, and I was the editor of the Kickboxing Ring Report, and I had been for, 4 or 5 years at that point. And I was just chattering away about all these guys and how they fought, and blah, 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 blah. And he turns to me and goes, "Damn, you're like the fight professor over here." And that was April 1998, and it kind of stuck.
That's perfect. That's the way it works out. So, like you were talking about, just the martial arts part of it being kind of a small portion of your life journey, and something, I'm very interested in as well is music. So I know music has also been a very large portion of your life as well. And, how did that come about to getting started in music and where it went from there?
Yeah, I don't know why I was attracted to drums, but it started in my early teen years, maybe around, 13. And my parents took us to a pool party at a friend's house. I can't remember if we were living in Fremont or Visalia at the time, but one of the kids had a drum set in his room. And so everybody's out playing by the pool, but I went in and I just couldn't believe, what are these things? My God, it was like a flying saucer that landed on the planet. I was really curious about it. And so I got behind the drums and started to make noise, and nobody cared because they were all out there screaming and yelling and jumping in the pool and everything. So I sat in there for a while. Then a couple of years went by, and then, I don't care if people know my age. When I was in high school, the bands that were getting airplay were The Who, Cream,
right,
and this is before Led Zeppelin. And a lot of these bands, Jimi Hendrix, they were getting airplay on the regular radio, AM radio, and FM was something new. And then they had this band called Cream, and they had this live album called Wheels of Fire. And the drummer, Ginger Baker, did a 17-minute drum solo. And one day they played that on the Underground Hour at 6 o'clock on a Sunday night. And I had my little transistor radio, and all of a sudden they played this thing, and my life changed when I heard that. And so I had to get a drum set. So long story short, got a drum set, annoyed the shit out of all my neighbors for about 6 months, got into a band. But the thing was this: Ginger Baker was a great soloist and a great accompanist with the band, but all I focused in was the solo. So when I get with bands and start playing live, I'd be doing all these crazy wild licks all over the place. And guys said, "Dude, just play the pocket, boom, boom, boom." I mean, and it was a thing where I had to make that adjustment from being a soloist into being a guy that just had a good backbeat, a la Ringo Starr or Bernard Purdie on the old Stax, records or something like that. So that's how it started. And then I moved down to LA in 1975 and then joined a number of bands, and then finally ended up in a band called Snow, which featured Doug Ellison on lead vocals, Tony Cavazzo on bass, and Tony's brother Carlos Cavazzo on guitar. Now, Carlos Cavazzo's name may sound familiar to those that know a little bit about rock and roll, because he made it to number 1 in the Billboard charts in a band called Quiet Riot in 1973. And so our band Snow was prior to his work with Quiet Riot. So now in 2017, Snow, hashtag Pure Uncut Rock, we have a double album that's coming out on July 21st. As a matter of fact, that's a week from tomorrow. So we're kind of excited about that, and life is kind of crazy.
Wow, that's awesome. That's coming out. I'll definitely check out that album. Love some of the older rock, so that's really cool. And I was kind of thinking about the drums, and it's kind of interesting. I guess kind of it tied in as well because my brother played drums. He did martial arts for a good while, and I think there's something to be said about that. For some reason, I feel like drums is the hardest, especially with like hand-eye coordination and keeping a rhythm in your head. Like it completely vexes me. I have no idea. Like I can barely keep a beat with drums. But putting the whole ensemble together, you have to really have spatial awareness of things around you with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, Rob, you being a martial artist, do you remember the very first time you walked into a martial arts studio or a dojo and how you didn't know these complex moves? In your case, with primarily jiu-jitsu, right?
Right.
Do you remember that?
I do.
And you start at A before you get to B, before you get to C, before you get to, you know what I mean? You learn the alphabet, basically. And what a lot of people do is they try and learn Z first. Let's start with ABC, and if you take the slow, methodical pace, you develop what is called a foundation. Now, most people are not very patient, so they want to learn X, Y, Z right away. But, in the case of learning drums, it's basically the same thing. If you get really enamored of something really technical, a drummer, let's say, some really advanced prog drummer, Mike Portnoy of Dream Theater or somebody like that. Okay, Mike probably started with the basics as well, whether it be rudimental basics or whether it be independent basics on the drum set. Like with me, I was crazy. I crashed in and I had to go back and learn the basics at one point. I did, because if you don't have that foundation, you won't float for very long.
Right. Oh, that does make sense. It just, I guess maybe I've never really looked at it that way. Like so I could sit down, I can keep a very basic beat, but I guess that's kind of like you said. I walked in and I saw people doing wild, guard passes and sweeps, and it completely just was like, what the hell do I do with that? How do I do that? And then I'm sitting there, I'm going, okay, one leg over, pull, break open the leg, stuff like that.
Right. Bingo. Yeah, you hit it right on, because the analogy to me between martial arts and music, let's say it be guitar, bass, drums, keyboard, whatever it is, the fundamentals are important, but the fundamentals are something that you use as a structure to express the individuality that you have inside of yourself. And that's true with martial arts, with acting, with music. You know what I mean? Like, you have to learn some fundamentals. I mean, you can try and totally be inventive, but most people have some sort of influence when they first begin, and then they break away, and then they show themselves through their art.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that does make sense, because everybody's game is different. Everybody's kickboxing, everybody's, groundwork very different. And, I guess maybe that's why I really enjoy both. I grew up, went to Catholic school, so and my mom was the music teacher there, so it was kind of you will learn some sort of musical instrument, whether you like it or not. But I'm very grateful that she did that to me. So I started playing saxophone under the guise of, this will totally help me pick up women at some point in my life. And I'll tell you, a concert band saxophonist isn't really doing too well for himself these days in the ladies department. But doing that and getting to learn about, playing the basic scales and then further into like stuff I wanted to play. So, went from playing, like hot cross buns, that's the first thing you start out to. Eventually, after I graduated high school, playing in a ska band wasn't a very big thing, but it was something I enjoyed, and that became my style. So I guess that does make sense.
Yeah, the thing is, though, if you really, really have a burning desire to make your instrument into something popular, you can grow a beard, wear some tight jeans, get some, big earrings, and get a big part in the side of your head with really shaved on the sides, and go out there and put that saxophone through some kind of a phase shifter or something, and then form some crazy ass band and wear sunglasses. Maybe you might be onto something.
Huh. Well, that's definitely going to be my backup to being a jiu-jitsu instructor. Or I might just do it on the side, whatever. It's my thing. So That's, I will definitely credit you if that does take off.
But you got to have that haircut though. No, just kidding.
I can do the sunglasses. My hair is kind of short right now, so it's going to take a little while to get that length on it. The beard, no problem. But yeah, the length for the haircut, it's going to take me a couple years, I think.
Yeah, you gotta cash in on the hipster craze before it goes out, which should be any day now.
Oh yeah, it's on its last leg, I think.
Yeah.
So also, going back to being the fight professor, talking about MMA. So something that also really drew me to Pride was the fact that I would watch. The way it used to be was there was the UFC 1 month, and then Pride the next month. And then sometimes if we got super duper lucky, there was a UFC and a Pride on the same month. And all my buddies, we'd pull our money together so we could watch both. And something that really stuck out that was different between the UFC and Pride was, the UFC, it's in kind of like a very intimate arena, and the attitude was different. But watching Pride, you had places like the Saitama Super Arena where you just had tons and tons of people like paying very close attention to these matches and watching the difference between the reactions of the crowd. So like, UFC, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. A lot of people yell and scream, want to see the knockouts. But then I remember, especially starting jiu-jitsu, watching some of the greats like Sakuraba or Renzo Gracie doing moves on the ground, and they'd pass guard and the crowd would go nuts because it's something that they recognized. And what was the experience like having, what was it? What was the largest crowd like? Was it 50,000? Just
91,000.
Holy shit. All right, I was way off. 91,000 people.
Yeah, the reported figure for Pride Shockwave 2002 in August was 91,000 people. Now, it was a co-promotion between Pride, K1, and Antonio Inoki's Wrestling Empire. All three worked together. And you had some mixed matches, but the main event was Crow Cop versus Sakuraba, and the co-main event was Don Fry in a kickboxing match against Jerome LeBanner. Semi Schultz fought a kickboxing match against Ernesto Hus, two of the greatest kickboxers ever from Holland. And Vanderlei fought. Who else fought? Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira fought Bob Sapp when Bob was really, really dangerous before he just got, basically sidetracked all the commercials and all the, entertainment opportunities he had that took him out of the gym. But that show was 91,000 people at National Stadium in Japan. And they were worried prior to the show that it was going to rain because in August, there's a lot of humidity in Japan. And sometimes it'll just bust out and be raining. And so they're outdoors in a soccer stadium. If it started raining, like monsoon rains or something, they booked the venue 2 days in a row. Fortunately, it didn't rain. And then you had Antonio Inoki parachuting at halftime into the venue. It was crazy. And Helio Gracie lit the torch. He got handed the torch by Inoki. It was like the Olympics of MMA at the time.
Wow, that is amazing. 91,000, and for some reason I don't know why I always thought it was like 40 or 50, but 91,000. That has got to be just insane to be in a crowd like that, hearing just the energy from that crowd.
Well, the funny thing is that Bas Rutten, my partner back then, who I had a great time working for those 3 years from 2000 to 2003, we asked our producer, a guy named Michael Braverman, who was an absolute godsend for us because he understood our crazy sense of humor. We said, Michael, we're going to be outdoors. It's going to be like 100 degrees out here. He said, don't worry. You guys can wear Hawaiian shirts and shorts. I look at Bob and I go, man, this guy, yeah. It was so awesome because usually we wore the suits and everything. Even when Boss and I would be sparring in front of the ring girls and doing the intro of the show, that particular show, it was a godsend because otherwise we would have just melted those suits.
Humidity suits and heat definitely do not go hand in hand in that type of situation. I've been in not, having to do that in front of people, but having to stand there in a suit. And I'm like, why are we outside? Like, what the hell is wrong with these people? Can we just go inside where it's air conditioned?
Well, the funny thing is that there was a Pride show that Boss couldn't make, and they had me partner with Eddie Bravo, who's one of the preeminent jiu-jitsu, he's a progressive jiu-jitsu guy. He's not a classic guy. And so the show was outdoors in, I think it was July or maybe August, at the place called Sable Dome, which had a dome over the top of it, but it's actually outdoors. And it was so hot. It was 100 degrees with 100% humidity. And we're there in a suit, Eddie and I, and we are just like dying. So I go over to ringside, and there's a friend of mine who used to be the lead commentator for the Japanese broadcast of Pride and K1 and everything. He did everything. And he had a magazine called SRXDX, and his name was Tanakawa. He later became the head of K1. So I go over to Tanakawa, and I don't speak too much Japanese. I go, "Konnichiwa, sensei," and I bow to him, and he just laughed at me, and don't call me sensei, because I just joke around, but he was really one of the guys that really was a big influence on me. So he was wearing a suit, and he grabbed the lapel of his suit and pulled it up, and I could see that his whole shirt underneath was completely drenched with sweat. And so that was a big challenge for us, the outdoor thing. And I remember going from the hotel. Ken Shamrock fought Fujita, Gilbert Ivel fought Gary Goodridge, and Henzo Gracie fought Sakuraba, and then they did the Steven Seagal arm trick in that particular fight. But the thing is that when we were driving from the Tokyo Hilton to the venue, which was about an hour drive, I think, or 45 minutes, the air conditioning didn't work on the bus. And so Ken Shamrock was there screaming at the bomb, "What the hell? That's hot as a bomb," because it's basically like cutting weight the day of a fight.
Right.
You don't want to be in a sauna the day of a fight, but that's kind of what it was like. And so people don't realize that, because when they see that fight with Ken Shamrock and he basically runs out of gas, some of that was the weight cut he suffered on the way to the venue, but people don't know that because they didn't see that. Wow. But I was there on the bus with him. So that was kind of, and I was dressed. Yeah, you didn't know that, right?
I did not, because I remember watching that fight, and because, like I said, we all of our friends got together, and us being white belts who knew everything about MMA at the time, obviously, and we're kind of like,
yeah.
What the hell happened to Shamrock? Like, oh well, he's gassing out because he probably didn't train for that, and that's like, understand things change, like viewpoints change, perspectives change, and. Like, I had no idea, so I definitely feel for that guy, because I get cranky after 5 minutes in something like that. Like, we had a tournament out here in Germany, and it was kind of a similar situation. It was in a gym. There's no air conditioning in it. It's about 92, 93 degrees outside. You've got a bunch of sweaty people doing jiu-jitsu on the inside, and coaching. I remember I went back home and weighed myself, and I dropped like 4 pounds of just water weight, sitting there watching my guys compete. And I was like, I didn't even want to know what happened to my guys. I was like, I need to make sure you guys, drink Gatorade or something, because I don't want you passing out on the way home.
Yeah. It's real. I mean, the climate in a situation like that can definitely have a big effect on your performance.
Yeah, and especially at such a high level like that. Fujita wasn't anybody to sleep on either. That guy, I think the only time I've seen him get knocked out, I guess even by the referee, was when the referee called it, was when Vanderlei got him at the Grand Prix. And that was, so having Shamrock having to fight him, especially after sitting in a hot bus for 45 minutes, sweating his ass off. My hat off to that guy. Oh my God, I had no idea, and I feel bad about it now. Go back and kick 20-year-old me in the face. Tell him to show a little more respect. So
yeah.
So with a lot of you were very close, like right there in the mix of a lot of Pride, and everybody talks about the great days of Pride, and I agree, it was some of the best MMA action you can get. Like, to you, what are some of the most memorable moments in Pride Fighting Championships that you've got to witness or commentate on, or even outside of Pride? What was something that really sticks with you that was just amazing, or maybe not a lot of people know about?
Well, generally speaking, it was still a little bit of that style versus style. It hadn't really evolved into complete MMA, which we see now, which there's no more secrets. There's really no more surprises that there were back in the days of Hoist versus Dan Severn. What's a triangle choke? And, flying knee, where did that come out? That doesn't work. Oh, yeah, it does. So it was a thing where there was still a little bit of that, and I think a lot of it was around the mystique of Shootbox, which was the team centered in Brazil, which the original Shootbox star was Jose Pele Landi, and then Vanderlei Silva, and then Shogun, and then Ninja, and then Chris Cyborg, a lot of really scary people. And Shootbox had this thing where they wouldn't really associate with the other teams. It was like basically them against the world. And that really made for some drama because it wasn't forced, it wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't packaged by some CEO in a boardroom. Well, I want you to talk smack here. Okay, we'll talk smack. I'll make it look real. Yeah, oh yeah, we'll make it look like we really hate the guy. It wasn't that. It wasn't like an acting job. That's just the way they were. So that created a lot of heat between, especially other Brazilian teams like Brazilian Top Team and some of the Lucha Libre teams. But generally speaking, as far as the greatest matches, there's basically two that really stand out. And the first one was the heavyweight championship fight between Fyodor, also known as Fedor by the Western world, Emelianenko versus Rodrigo Minotauro Nogueira. Now, at the time, in 2001, 2002, Nogueira had established himself as being the greatest fighter in the world as far as the greatest heavyweight. He beat Semi Schultz, beat Mark Coleman. He beat, a lot of really top guys for them. So he was on the magazine I had, Fight Sport with Stephen Quadros, put out by Black Belt, which is on all the newsstands in America. I had him on the cover of my third issue. A really good picture of him too. He really looks scary, So everybody said, well, wow, Nogueira, the last thing you want to do is get into this guy's guard because he will triangle or armbar you for sure. Emelianenko, who like Nogueira had come from the Rings organization, which was similar to Pancrase, except for they didn't allow any punching or striking to the face at all. So Boston, I thought these guys would struggle coming into Pride where you allow punching, and soccer kicks and all this kind of stuff. Well, both of them rose to the top and defied that logic. But when they met, to me, it was like the true Ali versus Frazier 1, 2, or 3, whichever one you want. It was the true heavyweight championship. They had two guys from different countries, from different ideologies. The Sambo guy versus the Jiu-Jitsu guy. There's all these clashes there. And both guys were not big shit talkers. They basically were very respectful, and they were very aware of the dangers that the other guy faced. But as you saw in that first fight between Emelianenko and Nogueira, Fedor basically took control of that fight early, dove right into the guard, and just beat the living shit out of Nogueira for the entire time, and it went the distance. And Boston and I were shocked at the outcome, but also we felt that was really huge for the integrity of the game to have a fight like that between two different countries, two different styles, and two guys that were absolutely unequivocally at the number 1 and number 2 position. And of course, the belt changed that hand, and Emelianenko became the champion, and that was the beginning of his legacy, basically, as far as a worldwide phenomenon. The other fight was one that we probably won't ever see in modern televised times, and that was Kazushi Sakuraba versus Royce Gracie. And it was the first round of the Pride Grand Prix in May of 2000. Royce Gracie, before the event, had said, well, the only way I'll fight in this tournament is if you allow me to have unlimited time limit of 15-minute rounds until somebody taps out or somebody gets knocked out. So they wanted that because they really wanted Royce in there because Royce was the biggest star in the UFC ever at that time in 2000. So they maxed him up against Kazushi Sakuraba. Now, in one of the pre-fight pressers, Sakuraba wore a diaper during doing interviews with the press. And they said, why are you wearing a diaper? And he goes, well, it's going to be a long fight. I want to get ready because I'm going to have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the fight. So it was this different clash of a serious martial artist, a proven champion of 3 different UFC tournaments, UFC 1, UFC 2, and UFC 4. And he was a semifinalist in UFC 3, but then he got injured in the chemo fight and couldn't continue, whatever. So there was a lot of mystique behind Royce Gracie. Sakuraba, on the other hand, had come from pro wrestling. But if you look deeper into him, he was like a lower level wrestling champion, and he was a practitioner of catch wrestling, which was the Karl Gotch style, which was one of the big styles that was the foundation of pro wrestling in Japan, which gave it a lot of legitimacy. So he was used to fighting with jiu-jitsu guys and people that were going to do that style of submissions. The fight lasted 90 minutes. And it eventually, Rorion Gracie had to throw in the towel because of the low kicks from Sakuraba. Royce couldn't continue. And it was one of those things where when that towel went in, that crowd erupted. It was not only nationalistic pride, of course, their boy had won, the national hero, but it was also the changing of the situation in the sport at the time, which was still evolving a lot, because you basically still had two submission wrestlers in there. Royce Gracie representing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Sakuraba representing catch wrestling or pro wrestling, whatever you want to call it. And it was Royce Gracie was a serious guy. Sakuraba was, he'd drink, he would smoke, he would do whatever he wanted to do. He was like this kind of low-key country guy with this sardonic sense of humor. So that was a big, big change in the business. And I remember the next day, the newspapers in Japan, we're talking about like the New York Times or the LA Times equivalent in Japan, they had on the front cover in color pictures of Sakuraba doing this flying punch over Royce's guard, and they had all kinds of crazy coverage. So it was really, really big at that time. I would have to say those two events, Emelianenko versus Nogueira, the first fight, and Royce versus Sakuraba, the first fight, were the two biggest memories for me from Pride.
Man, and those are two amazing memories as well, because like you said, we'll probably never see it televised ever again, because not a lot of people, unfortunately, would want to sit through an hour-and-a-half fight. I mean, granted, I watched the whole thing, and it was like, I saw a lot of things I'd never seen before, obviously, like the way he was using the ring and Royce's gi to his advantage, and then just Royce putting, anybody fighting for 30 minutes is ludicrous, and my hat's off to him. An hour and a half is way out there, and that is definitely just an accomplishment in itself between those two fighters.
Plus Sakuraba did something that no one ever even dared to do, and he turned his back on Royce while they're in the fight. Usually when everybody gave up their back, that was it, but he had no problem with that. And he was undoing the drawstring on Royce's gi to where his pants are going to fall down. He was doing all kinds of the Mongolian chop. I mean, he was doing some crazy show things. But there were a lot of static moments in the fight. There were in 90 minutes. It wasn't like nonstop action. There was a lot of parts where you'd basically go to the refrigerator and come back and nothing would have happened.
Yeah,
But
it's conservation of energy. I mean, I feel bad enough teaching an hour-and-a-half class, so. Those guys, holy crap! So, speaking of teaching, you've stepped back into, I guess, an instructor role now, sharing your martial arts experience with others and helping guide them on their martial arts journey as well.
Yeah, I've been teaching for quite a long time, since probably the late '80s. And the way I started teaching, I'll get to your actual question in a minute, was I did a movie, and there was this actress in the movie. She was actually a Playboy model, and so I invited her and her boyfriend, who's a friend of mine, who's a photographer, to this party in Century City. And Don Wilson, Don the Dragon Wilson, who's one of the greatest kickboxers America has ever produced, was there, and he's an old friend of mine. He and I have known each other since 1987, when I met him at the Jet Center. And so the woman, Christine was her name, blonde, really hot. She wanted to learn how to do kickboxing. So she asked me, she said, well, Stephen, I want you to teach me how to do kickboxing. I'm standing in front of Don Wilson. I said, no, no, this guy over here, he's a 10-time, you should train with this guy. And Don looked at me and said, no, Stephen, you should teach her. And I thought, wow, but I'm not a 10-time world champion. I never really, had a professional or amateur fighting career. As I like to say, I've had as many, professional fights as Bruce Lee, Cus D'Amato, or Angelo Dundee, if you know who they are. Yeah. And I said, really? Maybe I should, because I basically knew everything about that, kickboxing in a nutshell, the basics of back then. So I started to teach her. And then later on, I, started teaching group classes at mainly a health club. Now I did train fighters, such as probably my top prospect at the time was a guy named Giovanni Lem, who now is a force in Virginia Beach with kickboxing, and he's following in my footsteps as being a commentator. But I used to teach group classes also at a place called Bodies in Motion, where there are other world champions in boxing and kickboxing. Jerry Trimble was PKA kickboxing champion. Mike Weaver, who was WBA world boxing champion in the heavyweight division, who fought Larry Holmes, Lennox Lewis, and also Kathy Long, who's another world champion. So we all taught at Bodies in Motion for a while, and I taught there for years. But about 4.5 years ago, I stopped teaching because I wanted to be taken out of my comfort zone. It got too easy. The classes were always packed. And, I became very effective at that little environment. But I thought it was limiting me because it was too easy. So I stopped teaching because I wanted to get myself back into shape. Because when you teach, you can walk around and act important while everybody else is busting their ass, but you don't get in better shape when you do that.
Right.
Because you're giving the energy. And Rob, you probably know this when you teach. When you give energy, you don't really get in shape when you do that because everybody else is taking your knowledge and working out with it. So I wanted to get back into shape a little bit. But recently I got an offer with a smaller gym in Eagle Rock called LAKO, as in Los Angeles Knockout. And they wanted me to come in and start teaching boxing primarily and kickboxing. And so I've really been enjoying doing that, being back on the handle. And I've got a couple other offers, but, I'm not going to get into them right now. But one of them is actually with a really big boxing promotion, and they want me to start teaching at one of their gyms. So I really enjoy doing it. I enjoy teaching the everyman per se. As far as training professional fighters and things like that, I know so many great trainers where all they do when they spend that time in the gym, when Nick Hammers, Dwayne Ludwig, whoever it is, Buddy McGirt, who's a former welterweight world boxing champion. I mean, these guys, they spend that time, so they should be the ones training the professional amateur fighters. But the everyman, the people that want to just get a good workout, learn some technique, put the gloves on and bang a little bit, come to my class.
Nice. I love, you hit the nail on the head because I do feel it as well, like the energy. But I think teaching is it is such kind of a I'm not saying that'd be like, I'm an instructor. Like, I think it really is a selfless act, especially with a lot of the instructors I came up under, because instead of, like you said, taking time on yourself, getting your own technique, they're sacrificing that time to help people who really enjoy the sport or the art or whatever as well. And then, they benefit from you giving your knowledge and giving them knowledge instead of taking up time to worry about your own training. And I think it's an extremely noble profession for a lot of the people I've run into.
Yeah, to elaborate on that same point, Rob, I've had this discussion with numerous fighters, and I've known plenty of the top guys. I mean, look at all the guys that were from Strikeforce where I used to commentate: Daniel Cormier, Tyron Woodley, Nick Diaz. All these guys are moving into there. I had discussions with a lot of these type guys. I said, look, and I tell them, I said, correct me if I'm wrong. I said, to be a fighter, you have to be selfish. You go into the gym, it's my workout, everything's based around me, what I want to do, blah, 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 blah. You have to have that mentality, because if you don't, you will get beat because the other guy will have their selfishness. Now, to be a great trainer, you have to be selfless. It's not like a kung fu movie where you walk into the studio and the 90-year-old guy with a long beard can beat up everybody. That's bullshit. That doesn't happen. The trainer, his skill is to get inside of the young lions and to activate them to their highest level, not by beating them up physically himself, but by embracing whatever it is inside of them that they can help create that statue of what someone should be. The John Jones or wherever, like Greg Jackson, Mike Winkeljohn, they're aces at this. Now, people don't go, well, I want to see John Jones trainer fight because he's supposed to be badass in the gym. No. There's no legacy like that because that doesn't exist, because great trainers, I mentioned Cus D'Amato and Angelo Dundee earlier. Do people actually believe that Angelo Dundee could outbox Muhammad Ali? Do they really think that? No, of course not. They don't believe that. But Angelo Dundee knew how to activate whatever it was inside Muhammad Ali to make him great. So he helped him create him. It's like the guy Albert Einstein. It's not like Albert Einstein can get in the cage and beat up Floyd Mayweather. No, bro. But, you put him behind, some equations and he will change history. So you have to keep it in perspective. So the art of teaching is the art of giving. The art of being a fighter, you have to be into the art of taking.
So what would your advice be then for somebody who is starting their journey as an instructor towards, that's the path they've chosen. Fighting's cool and all, but I want to help train people. What's some solid advice you would give somebody who wanted to start teaching then?
Well, first of all, you have to have a really good foundation of whatever it is you're teaching. Now, you just give me a blank check there, but I'm going to just keep it to martial arts, whether it be striking, wrestling, or grappling. having a good foundation, and it doesn't mean that you have to have trained with a name coach, because there was a time when Matt Hume was not a name, when Crazy Bob Cook and Javier Mendez, AKA, were not names, where Phil Nurse or any of the people in New York were not names, where, any of the great trainers, and if I skipped anybody, Mike Winkeljohn, Greg Jackson, Floyd Mayweather Sr., whoever, these people were not known household commodities, and they etched their way into there. Some of them did it through actually being a champion, or like take Freddie Roach, for instance, one of the heralded boxing trainers, trained Tyson, Manny Pacquiao, Michael Moore, a bunch of really top-level guys, huge guys. Freddie Roach he would probably admit he wasn't really necessarily an A-class fighter, never became a big world champion or anything like that. It didn't matter, though, because he knew how to activate people inside of that. So you have to have the technical knowledge. You also have to have the ability to reinvent or redefine the basics. Rickson Gracie is one of the great trainers also, and he was absolutely the Gracie champion, one of the guys, the pre-UFC era that dominated the sport of no holds barred before it became MMA. Now, with Rickson, everything's about the basics. His stuff is back control or snaps in the arm. That's his deal. And he knows so many ways to get that, because, as you know, Rob, knowing one technique, there's about 1,000 ways to get into that position to get that technique. But you have to really basically know and be progressive and be original. Now, that's one thing that people trip up on, is they don't have an original approach, whether that be a personal approach or that be a technical approach. Me personally, I feel that the guy who has great personal skills, that knows how to ignite whatever it is inside of his charge or his student, that's the guy who's going to go further than the guy, I know 16 million moves, but nobody likes you, bro. People don't like to be around you, man. You're an arrogant prick or whatever your deal is. So people don't want to train this guy over here. But the guy that, has got the charisma, Angelo Dundee, Custio Amato, he had a lot of personal charisma with his charges. Jose Torres, Floyd Patterson, and then Mike Tyson, So, I mean, they knew how to get inside these guys, and they formed a bond with their people. You know who else has got that is Roger Gracie. Man, that guy, he's got really good personal skills. Renzo Gracie, great personal skills. These guys know how to really get into people's heads and make them want to do this training, which is a pain in the ass. You know that. I mean, when you're out there, practicing with these wild bulls every day, sometimes you get dinged up, and you got to want to get back in there. And so if you have a little bit of that love from the family-oriented basics, you really want to have that thing. Because if there's a bunch of Karate Kid evil karate instructors sweep the leg and everybody's mean and everybody's an asshole and you get out there, don't be a pussy, that don't fly for very long.
No, because then you start just, like you said, nobody wants to be around you. Nobody wants to learn from you. And then, I feel like that's, in essence, being a failure of an instructor and sharing what you love.
Yeah, I think being an instructor, there's a fine line, because a lot of people get confused. Young men, and even women now, of course, Chris Cyborg and, all the other great female competitors out there. But I only know from the male point of view because I'm a man. So I've had guys come into my classes for different reasons. And some came in, well, this guy, who's this skinny white dude, he can't do shit, and you feel the energy. You think, oh, shit, guys have been listening to too much hip hop or something. I don't know what the deal is, but it's like, so you have to deal and navigate through that, because many people approach training in martial arts for self-defense and all these high-minded Mr. Miyagi type reasons. And some people want to learn because they want to get some payback against some guy that kicked their ass 2 years ago. They do. So they want to, and then you have to figure out a way. That's where Master Sun Ho Song, who I trained with initially, he really saw through people, and he really helped you deal with the outlying issues that caused you to seek this thing out. Bill Gates didn't train in martial arts, and I'm sure that Bill Gates could probably not beat anybody that ever fought in the UFC in the history of the UFC. But guess what? He's the most powerful guy in the world, and he's going to have a long life and really, really be the envy of everybody that might be able to kick somebody's ass in the octagon or a ring, if you catch my meaning. So sometimes the training in martial arts, you have to think, okay, why is this person training? And you get 10 people, they're going to have 10 different reasons. Even though, I don't want to be bullied. because I wanted to have the discipline and have confidence in myself. And there's a lot of different reasons. So you have to be able to pick every single one of those locks, if you understand what I mean.
Right. No, that does make sense. And trying to unlock what everybody wants. And, usually it's, like you said, a lot of people aren't going to admit it because I think maybe their pride or their ego kind of gets in the way because everybody wants to be the big tough person, be the, the warrior, be the gladiator, whatever. But sometimes, people don't want to admit that, yeah, like, oh yeah, I'm taking martial arts because I got my ass beat by this dude. Like, but if you can get that out of them, I think that will obviously help in their journey towards whatever martial arts goals they want.
Well, the funny thing is that prior to me training in martial arts under Master Song, I had been in fights before, and I had lost about half of them, and I won some of them, at least half of them too. And, it was a thing where I only knew how to hurt people. I had big shoes on. I knew how to, do some pretty, it was before I learned how to do the technical way of throwing a side kick and a back kick and a straight punch or whatever it was. But the thing was, is that after I trained in martial arts, my mentality was not as much of like, what are you looking at, dude? Can I help you? I didn't have that chip on my shoulder of what I may have had when I was younger, because when you're younger, sometimes you think the posturing, don't be a pussy. You can let that guy say that to you. There's all this fantasy stuff about what a quote man should be because you're a child still, and you're becoming an adult. You're starting to get pubic hairs and testosterone and whatever. You start going through changes, and testosterone happens, and you get more aggressive. It happens. If you look at the animal kingdom, the young lions start playing with each other, and they're batting each other around. Then they play rougher and rougher and rougher, and then next thing you know, they're fighting with each other. And it's nature, and we all go through that. And a lot of times, fear comes into the equation. Hicks and Gracie, one of the great martial artists in modern times, for sure, said this, and I'll never forget this quote: "Fear is always present." Now, that's a guy, people think, that guy's not scared of anything. Well, he just said that. So that would give anyone the embrace that the feelings they're having, this guy's looking at me, he talks shit, he threatened me, he called my mother a name or something, and then you get scared. Oh, what happened? But then knowing that a guy like that, who's been in lots of fights and been able to prevail pretty much all of the time, has that attitude, so that can help people calm down and realize the human experience is full of a lot of emotions. Fear is one of them.
Wow. Very profound, very, that's stuff a lot of people need to think about as well. And
yeah,
it is very interesting. And like you said, you bring up Hickson and you talk about like the toughest guy, everybody like knows Hickson. Even people who may not have followed MMA to a T know who Hickson is, or, you say the Gracies and stuff like that. And you think of the, like, one of the biggest dynasty names or families in combat sports ever. They've accomplished so much, and having the champion, as you said he is, say that there was always fear present is something that like really should put some stuff into perspective for people, in general, for fights as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, absolutely. A guy like those guys grew up in a family of gunslingers. Think about it.
Yeah, there's. I don't think there were many easy days in the Gracie family growing up when it was time to go train.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure there. Think about it. If you grow up and your name is Gracie, wait a minute, what does that mean? You're a fighter. Well, what if? No, I want to study science. I want to design clothes. No, you're a fighter. Okay, Dad, or Mom, or who, you sure? Yeah, no. Here's a gi. Get out there.
Yeah, no choice in the matter. Go live up to the family name and go kick some ass. And hearing words like that from those guys, that is something that I think a lot of people in combat sports, martial arts, and just in life in general can really should listen to.
Yeah, it's like, I want to play violin. No, son, here's a gi. Go.
So before we head out, I'd like to ask for one final, or two things actually, if you don't mind. One final piece of advice we talked about the everyman training. We like to pride ourselves as a podcast for the everyman because we like to hear about everybody's story. Everybody's story is like really important to us because, you know, as somebody like, you know, big name as yourself, you know, a lot of the people who help watch the sport and stuff like that is just the average Joe who likes to train. So maybe some advice for somebody who might be struggling in their martial arts training. And then also anybody you'd like to thank before we wrap up the show. So go wild, sir. Absolutely nuts if you want to.
Well, I can go wild, but that's a whole nother conversation. But, okay. In training, you have to be very careful that you select an environment, a teacher, a studio, a dojo, that does not endorse or condone abuse and call it training. Now, what do I mean by that? Usually it's around the tough guy machismo attitude, don't be a pussy, don't tap out, this kind of stuff. You don't want to be in that kind of a situation because generally speaking, those kind of environments don't produce champions and they don't produce people that are happy. Now, the happiness part, you have to enjoy the training. And this isn't something you have to force yourself or teach yourself to do. It's something that's automatic, you know, in a way. Like I remember the first time I walked into the studio under Master Song and started Kia, boy, you know, I mean, make that loud sound. It's a karate thing. I thought, I'm at home, man. This is me. This is what I can do. I was very confident I'd be a world champion or whatever, which I never was because drumming, I came to that crossroads. But just enjoy yourself. It's super important that you have fun. Now, if you're with people that are constantly hurting you, injuring you, and they don't have control, you have to man up and say, no, thanks. Because just because you walk into a gym, it doesn't mean you have to get in there and spar with some psycho. If you don't feel right about it, even if somebody, come on, don't be a pussy. I've seen world champions in boxing tell guys that wanted to spar with them off the street, no, I'm not going to spar with you because the guy is in there, he's trying to make a name for himself. He sees this champion, he's going to try and punk him, maybe get the video out and all this kind of, there's a lot of traps in that. You have to be strong enough to resist anything that will be detrimental to your health. Now, that's a really important thing because, honestly, the animals, let's say the lions and tigers, they don't go to a lion and tiger school to learn how to kill. They don't. You either got it or you don't. Now, I know that's what martial art instructors don't want to hear. But for me, the aspect of, quote, fighting, I'm talking about real fights where somebody slaps your mother in front of you or something like that, where you have to engage in a physical confrontation. There's part of it you can learn technically, but part of that is built inside of you, and not everybody has it because usually it comes from a very dark place, and a place sometimes people go through some horrendous experiences that make them angry, then they want to be a fighter. But if you don't have that, be realistic that you don't have that, but still train, because if you get into trouble and you have a format, whether it be karate, boxing, kickboxing, wrestling, or mixed martial arts under one of the great teachers, that foundation might come in and save your ass when you least expect it. So just have a good time training. Now, as far as people I'd like to thank Pete Sugarfoot Cunningham, my sensei in kickboxing. I'd like to thank Master Sunho Song up in Santa Cruz, California, a great influence at the beginning of my martial art journey, and he still is today. I'd like to thank my mother, my father. My mother's passed away, of course, my stepmother, my stepfather, my brother. And I'd like to thank all of the fans that have supported me throughout my career as a martial artist, throughout my continuing career as an actor, and my continuing career with Snow in the band as a drummer. Thank you so much. And Rob, thank you very much for having me. You've been a great host.
Mr. Quadros, thank you so much for coming on the show. Like, this has been a hell of an experience, and I have learned a lot, and I appreciate all the advice you've given. And just hearing about your story has just been like a treat. So thank you so much, sir.
My pleasure. And, you know, I have to give you a lot of respect because we have not discussed McGregor versus Mayweather at all. So that shows a lot of strength.
Well, that could be a definite another whole hour of we talk about going wild. I may piss off
I can sum up my views on that historic cash grab in 2 words.
Go for
Thank
it.
you.
Go for it.
No comment.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, the Fight Professor. Thank you again, sir. And like I said, really appreciate it, and thank you for being on the show and for that amazing insight with the Mayweather McGregor fight. So, ladies and gentlemen,
my pleasure, Rob. I'll talk to you soon, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of the Big Jiu-Jitsu Show, a member of the Podbros Podcast Network. Don't forget to go to podbros.com and find yourself another podcast you want to listen to. Go check out our sponsors, Trap and Roll Soap Company, Tape Armor, PR Performance, and Angry Joe Coffee, and find all these episodes and many, many more on bjjshow.com. I'm Rob, and I'll see you guys next time.